feedback from somewhere. Okay. It's nice and sunny in Ontario now. Still working. I'm still battling feedback. Anything we can do about that?
It doesn't sound too bad here, Don. Did you use a phone or are you using a microphone?
I'm using a phone.
Okay. It doesn't sound too bad. If it gets a problem, then I'll stop you.
We'll just talk here and then see what happens. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So my topic today is mixed anaerobic digestion agricultural lands in Ontario. We've had a fair amount of experience on this in Ontario, especially with digestion. This is kind of we call it our second time around. There was a number of plants constructed in the 70s and 80s on farms, and most of them have been shut down. And starting in about 2003, 2004, a number of new plants have been built. And I'm specifically talking about plants here that work on farms and are digesting manure along with other materials. So some of the changes that have taken place to make this economically viable is the ability to sell green energy on the grid. I'll talk about that later. And also the ability to mix in off-farm source materials, and that really is the focus of my talk. So this is the layout of the talk. I will briefly discuss why we're involved and interested in this in the Ministry of Agriculture. I'll have a schematic of typical farm-based systems. I will show some pictures of typical farm-based systems. I will talk about progress, and I will talk about the legislative changes during the progress talk, and I will talk about ongoing challenges. So the reasons why, I got about 6 bullet points here to summarize it really on the Ministry of Agriculture side. And I do work, I'm a byproduct engineer with the Ministry of Agriculture. So my focus is basically any byproducts that are produced in farms and on food processors and any organic materials that are applied to land. So that's kind of my role. I'm working on the engineering aspects of it. So back to the main reasons. First of all, we see this as an opportunity for a new revenue stream on the farm. We see it as renewable energy production, so clean energy production. There's been quite a focus on that in the last few years in Ontario. We see it as an ability to utilize food byproducts to support food processing. So as the farmers produce the food goes to the food processors. The products then goes to the humans or animals or for other uses, and then some of the byproducts can come back to the farm, be digested, and produce green energy, and then with remaining nutrients going on farmland to grow the crops that go back into the process. So it's it completes the cycle. There is an ability with digesters to improve the fertilizer value of the manure. So this can be plus and negative. So essentially in the digestion process, you make the materials more inorganic, so we make them closer to commercial fertilizer in response. So that means the nutrients are quickly available to the crop. If the nutrients are applied properly with the proper timing to the proper crops, then that's a good thing. However, there is some concern with this. I'll talk about this a little later. With timing and the aspects that we've got highly available nutrients, if they're applied at the wrong time, such as after winter wheat, say take winter wheat off in July, and if you apply these materials right after that, if you don't use a cover crop, all the most or all of the nitrogen will be lost. So that would be the improper usage of digesting. The next bullet point is really pertaining to energy crops, and this gives you one of the highest net energy yield per hectare. So if you have an acre of corn, if you compare that to, if we turn that into corn silage and we run corn silage through the digester, we get the highest amount of gigajoules per hectare. That's if you compare it to ethanol production using corn or biodiesel production using soybeans. The energy yield per hectare with energy crops is substantially higher for this process. Just a few notes, it's nowhere as close to solar panels, so solar panels give you the highest yield per hectare. And again, some of the concern of that is producing biogas, which is converted either to biomethane or to electricity. So it doesn't make as mobile a fuel as compared to ethanol or biodiesel. So a direct comparison may not be exactly correct. However, we in Ontario are not stressing right now using energy crops. As our main inputs for the digester, we are using manure, we're using waste feed, and we're using certain off-farm source materials, and I'll talk about that a little later. And the last point is societal benefits. So on the societal benefit side, there's 3 different components. The first one is pathogen reductions aiming towards clean water. When you digest manure, you cause at least 1 log or 10 times reduction in pathogen levels. So just with common digestion, totally mixed digester running for 30 days retention time at 38 degrees Celsius gives you between a 1 to 2 log reduction of pathogens. So we see it as an effective barrier towards pathogen reduction. And that was really one of the elements that started the whole the second digestion wave was after our incident that occurred in Walkerton, Ontario, where we did have manure from byproducts from manure getting into the groundwater and into wells and causing the great societal concerns there. We had looked for all the different ways we could as another barrier to reduce pathogens in manure, and biogas production was seen as one of the ways of doing it. And one of the criteria, one of the things we looked at was the total cost to achieve that. And again, if the biogas production can produce green energy and you can sell this energy, it may be a break-even proposition. However, we have found that just running on manure alone, it's difficult to have a big enough facility. So that's why the interest in bringing off-farm materials in. Typically with off-farm materials, if we blend off-farm materials at a 25% to 50% ratio with the manure, then we will increase the energy production typically by 4 times. So an example there is if you have 100 cows milking, you have a digester, you typically get it takes about 5 cows to get 1 kilowatt of electricity continuous. So that would give you 100 cows would give you 20 kilowatts of production continuous. If you add 25 to 50% off-farm material, you will increase that production to about 100 kilowatts. So it's quite effective. There's a lot more energy in most off-farm materials than there is in manure. The second societal benefit is the reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're doing a fairly in-depth study at 2 farms in Ontario now and finding very good control of greenhouse gas emissions. What happened before was liquid manure from our dairy farms in both cases, so it was kept in a tank either underneath the barn or outside of the barn, and there was ongoing emissions off of that tank. By capturing the running through a biogas plant first, heating it up and removing most of the methane, then you had a great reduction in greenhouse gas being emitted from the farmstead. the conclusions from that test, from those series of tests, have been done by the University of Guelph, and they're quite positive in favor of these systems being a very effective greenhouse gas measurement, greenhouse gas abatement process. Last thing, and probably when you talk to the farmers and you talk to the neighbors, it's the reduction of odor and less nuisance factors around our larger livestock farms. If you look into New York State, where they got large dairy operations, much bigger than that, that is one of the main reasons why digesters are going in. They're going in to treat the manure to reduce the odor. In Ontario, that hasn't been as much of the case. We are noting that there is less manure from that. However, I need to caution that one a bit, because when you bring in off-farm materials, you actually are creating a new odor source, especially before the materials are digested. So as the materials are stored, and we actually have a series of rules of how much materials you can take before you digest them. Typically, there has been some issues with the management of off-farm material prior to digestion. And those issues have been mostly noted at locations where digesters have built that are not directly attached to livestock farms. So we've had 3 digesters built that are attached to greenhouse operations. And the reason for that is that the waste heat from the digester is used to heat the greenhouse. However, those digesters have to bring in the inputs, they're bringing in manure, they're bringing in off-farm source materials such as food waste, and there has been some issues with nuisance issues with odor. You've got to remember that nothing was there before, so their neighbors are fairly sensitive to any new odor concerns. This just shows a typical sketch of a digester that runs on a farm. I'm just going to take, you can see my arrow there, hope you can see it. You have the input storage tank. We're just showing one tank there, but in most cases there will be a manure tank, and it could be solid materials going in too. And about half our digesters we're putting in solid material into a liquid tank. And essentially it's going in at 80%, 80 to 85% moisture. When it goes into the tank, the digestion removes 50% of the organics, so you end up with something that's about 92% moisture, and that will actually result in a liquid material. We don't have any solid biogas systems operating in the province. All our systems are operating, and they're all totally mixed, except for there's 2 that are batching through, but most of them are totally mixed, and they run liquid, and they're running between 90 to 96% moisture. If you're running much less than 90%, we've had a case where they're running at 88%, it gets very thick and it's very difficult to maintain your agitation systems. And we've had they have burned out a number of motors for the agitators, and so they have been actually adding some water to get it a little thinner so they can continually agitate. The input storage tank, so we would have manure that goes straight in. If you're taking off-farm material, we have 3 lists of off-farm materials. The first list are materials that can go straight into the digester. So they're typical foods that don't contain any meat. They're pre-processed. It's materials that are pre-consumer. So those materials typically can go right in. If it contains any meat or if it contains high odor, then that's in list number 2. And those materials have to be heat treated at some time in the process. And the heat treatment is 70 degrees Celsius for an hour or 50 degrees Celsius for 20 hours. Now, the person wonders where the heat comes from. The genset, the cogeneration unit, typically the water jacket around there runs at 80 degrees Celsius. So what they will do in these systems is they will take the hot water from the water jacket from the generator, run it over to the input treatment system, and it'll batch heat up about 1 cubic meter at a time. So they'll fill it quickly. It'll take 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours to heat up using a heat exchanger that surrounds the tank. They will then hold it there's a computer that holds it at 70 Celsius, and then at the end of that process, then it's slowly released into the biogas system. That does a few things. Number one, it removes almost all pathogens, and what we're mostly concerned about is foreign pathogens, say meat coming off of a plane. Somehow it got into the system. It could contain some disease organisms, and this material ends up very close to cows. I'll talk about that later, but we don't want to enter anything new on the farm. So the heat treatment or pasteurization process, 70 Celsius, is very effective in removing that. Also, it breaks down the incoming materials. So the heat, the high temperature causes the materials to break down and removes any of the biological processes that are already happening. So you're ending up with a completely new process, a completely kind of a sterile process when you put it into the biogas system. And so the bugs that are there are very effective in continuing to break down the materials. The last thing is that it adds heat to the process. And in most of our climate, most of the time, we need to continue to add heat to a biogas plant. Again, we typically run a biogas plant at 38 to 42 degrees Celsius. That's a mesophilic system. That's what we typically run at. You can run higher temperatures, but when you get higher, the system will start to become a little bit more unpredictable, and then it can easily crash. And also, if you have high nitrogen content in the input, you cannot run a high temperature. So we often have high nitrogen levels going in. So our most common farm-based input going in is dairy manure, liquid dairy manure. We do put some chicken manure in, which is higher nitrogen. We do put some pig manure and some beef manure in. We do add a little bit of corn silage. That typically is from a bunker, and it'll take the edges off the bunker. Any sort of spoiled material isn't quite as good quality, goes straight into the digester. The off-farm materials going in, there's a lot of grease trap waste. So there's in Toronto, for example, there's companies, they go around to the restaurants in Toronto and other cities, and they collect the grease trap. They take that back to a central facility. They remove the water, and then the fats that float and the solids that sink are concentrated, and that's moved out to the farm. Another common input is pet food. So there's a lot of pet food is going through the digester. So these are startups when the plants start and when the plants stop, and when pet food becomes post-dated, it comes back to the plant, it goes out to the biogas plant. Because the pet food contains meat, it used to be used for livestock feed, but it's not being used for it. So it would have, in many cases, it would have gone to landfill sites. So now it's going to biogas plant. But there's a multitude of other material. There's soups, there's candy, there's cold products, there's milk, there's cheese, there's apple pomace, and there's many different materials. Typically, the materials that go into the biogas plant are very liquid in nature. They're typically more difficult to compost. We're not after the ones where you have to blend these materials with more solid material to compost. So we see the compost group and the biogas group working. There's an opportunity to work well together where the highly compostable materials, say materials that contain leaves, sawdust, wood chips, they need to go to compost. They're not going to work in a biogas plant. Materials that contain minerals, like sand, that stuff all ends up in the bottom of the biogas plant. So that should not go to a biogas plant. That ideally should go into a composting operation. Materials that are such as the grease trap waste that contain fats, well, the best use would probably be to a biodiesel plant, but typically a lot of those materials are contaminated with a lot of organics, so they're hard to use in a biogas plant, in a biodiesel plant, so they may come to biogas. We're also taking glycerin from biodiesel plants, so it's interesting how the plants are all working. We're also working with some of the ethanol plants, and they're taking the byproducts from ethanol plants and going to the biogas plant. So we go into the digester. Our digesters have got a retention time of between 20 to, I'm just checking my mess, make sure there's nobody sending me messages. That's good. Okay, so I'll just keep talking, if I hear any different. The digesters are typically between 20 to 80 days in retention time. We're finding with manure and with corn silage that longer retention works better than shorter retention. You've got a tank that buffers more easy. It deals with changes of inputs, and plus there is the potential of higher yield. However, as you get your tank bigger, there's more to heat up at the beginning. It's harder to start, so there's a number of issues for and against. There is a biogas storage, typically on top of your tank, and that will store anywhere between 1 to 10 hours of biogas. In our pricing structure in Ontario, we pay 35% more for biogas produced during peak hours. So people, if they're not running steady, continuous around the clock, they will typically operate a system so that it will run as much as possible during peak hours and then will slow down during night hours. Again, that's difficult, say on weekends, when it's not peak hours, you'll have to run at the lower price during that period of time. The digestate comes out of the biogas, so this is a totally mixed system. So one of the challenges of totally mixed systems is if you have 30 days total retention, 1/30 of that material that comes out as digestate will be in the tank less than 1 day. So that means that that digestate is not, will still have some reactive components to it. So we see advantages, and many people are doing it. They're putting 2 tanks in parallel, 2 tanks in series, did I say that right? And so it goes from 1 tank, the first is staying in there for say 20 days, and it goes into the second tank, stays in there for 20 days. So then it's 1/400th of the tank that material that's coming out is in there for less than 1 day. So that's a much more effective way, and especially dealing with greenhouse gas losses, because that's where the greatest incident of greenhouse gas losses in these facilities is when the digestate comes out and it's still reactive. Other people are putting a cover over all of the long-term storage or over some of the long-term storage to actually give you a secondary process to recapture, to capture remaining methane or biogas coming off for greenhouse gas benefits and also for higher yield. From the digestate comes out, then in about 70% of the systems that we have, it goes through a screw press or other press, and that extrudes out the solid materials. It makes a very nice solid material. Typically it looks like compost. So the solid material is being sold, it's being used for a fertilizer, but the most common use is it's being used for bedding for the cows. So remember I said earlier that very quickly these materials will become close to the cows, and in many of our plants it's actually used for bedding for the cows. So that's why it's important that we're not bringing any new pathogens onto the farm. The other way that the compost system is, this compost-like material is being used, and this is going to get more common, is they're then composting this. It will heat up fairly rapidly. They compost it for 30 days, and then they put it back into the digester, and they get a yield from this material about the same as corn silage. So in other words, you get a much higher, you increase your yield by recycling it through the digester. Now, especially if you're using a lot of dog food or a lot of material with high nitrogen, you can only do that so long before you run into a nitrogen problem in the biogas plant. You have to address that problem. The remaining liquids then go into a long-term liquid storage, which are typically, which is applied to agricultural land. These liquids are high in inorganic N, so it behaves like commercial fertilizer. So we see more interest in people injecting this between corn rows or taking off a crop of hay and applying it right after the crop of hay and then using that to give a very quick fertilizer boost. If we're growing crops like wheat, and then we harvest the wheat and apply this, then they will need to use a cover crop to hold the nutrients as well as possible. The other good thing about this is that, well, through the digestion process and through the screw press, you end up with a highly liquid material. Both good and bad there too, but the good side is that it's very easy to apply in high precision application equipment. It goes through hoses very well, so you can apply it very evenly to the ground to replace commercial fertilizer. One of the issues is movement through macropores down to tile drains. That we have to be aware of that because it doesn't have the particles into sealing. I'm moving back up. The biogas itself goes to a cogeneration unit. We're typically using piston-type generators. Most of our systems are running with spark-fired systems, although we have dual-fired systems running 5-10% diesel, 90% biogas. We're looking at, because of the pricing changes, we're looking at smaller systems. If smaller systems go in, there will probably be more dual-fuel systems. They can be more efficient when smaller. The electricity from the cogeneration unit goes onto the grid. In all cases, we have way more electricity here than what the farms can use, so we're hooking into the grid, not without challenges, because there's many different hookups into the grid. In Ontario, the grid was designed for large producers and small users, and now we have large and small producers, and that changes the nature of the grid. So there's many issues with how the systems shut down. We have to worry about these systems islanding. So islanding is when, say, a car hits a pole and somewhere in the rural grid knocks the pole down, and the generator doesn't know the pole's down, and the usage between where the car hit the pole and further down the line is the same as what the generator is. That thing can just be running, and suddenly the system islands. The problem, that all works good until somebody rehooks the system up again, and then it could be off sync, and it'll cause big damage. So these systems have to be able to detect a fault in the grid and have to be able to shut down before a recloser, and that's a power system, before a recloser shuts down again. So it has to shut down in milliseconds, and that has been some of the challenge. The cogeneration unit, so for every unit of electricity you produce about 1.5 units of usable heat, but it's low-grade heat, so it's heat that's at 60 to 80 degrees Celsius, depending on the heat exchangers you have. And again, we can use that for greenhouses. We can use that to heat the barn. We've got corn dryers. In Europe, they have a system that will dry down, that will dry the manure. So you actually put the manure kind of into a pool, you heat the floor, and you dry the manure down. And you can also use it you can also recapture heat using an organic Rankine cycle motor. So we think we have a project there. This is a part of a 500 kilowatt system. He's going to take the waste heat and run it through a Rankine cycle motor, which takes the remainder heat out, and you get about another 40 kilowatts of electricity, which should be enough to operate the farm. So these are just typical systems we have operating in the province. This is a system here that's located just north of Woodstock, Ontario. That's a 250 kilowatt system. This is the feeder here. He puts the solid manure. He puts the dog, in this case he's using dog food, and he's using recycled solids, separated solids that go through. This is the picture where this just shows what the solids are like as they're going through the, after they come out of the separator. He then takes them to a bunker that holds it there for 30 days, and he puts it into this feeder tank, and in this feeder tank doses the digester. So his inputs are dairy manure from about 200 cows, the dog food, and separated solids. That's what he's using to power the system. It produces 250 kilowatts. He makes about, he's getting paid about 16 to about 20 cents an hour for the electricity, a little less. So this system makes about $50 an hour. We should be running about 8,000 hours a year. So there's about $400,000 of electricity sales from this facility. Interesting enough, this farmer beds with straw. He's got a lot of straw, so straw, after it recycles a few times, is a very good input. So the straw goes in the barn, goes then with the manure, goes through the digester, comes out through the solids, is composted, then goes back in through the feeder wagon, goes back to the digester, and slowly he is breaking down that straw and getting energy from it. So in that case, farmer doesn't want to use that as bedding because he wants to get energy from the straw he produces from wheat. So this is 100. This next one is a 100 kilowatt system on a beef farm with a farm poultry processing. So this is a Mennonite farm north of Waterloo. This is his tank where he takes the off-farm materials in. This is the digester behind. Just beside us, there's the poultry processing place. This is a farm in north of Guelph. This is a 250 kilowatts. So you'll see the lines coming in. We have a, it depends on the price tranches for the electricity. So we have a line of 100 kilowatts, a line of 250, and a line of 500. Each one you get a little bit less. This is where this is a 250 kilowatt system here, and this is where they are testing for the University of Guelph is testing for the greenhouse gas emissions. And so they actually had a lead because they couldn't get a connection, had problems with connection to the grid. They had a year where they could test the tank when it just held raw manure. So they had those tests. Now they have the tank holding digesting. One of his biggest inputs here is onions. So he is running with onions as the input, and when you're there, you can distinctly pick up the smell of onions, and you wouldn't want to have a neighbor too close to that. So the progress in here is that in Ontario, the industry is developing, and so we think that we have 30 projects that are operating or about to operate, and these are on-farm projects. And we have 15 newer expanding projects proposed under the recent feed-in tariff program. So people have applied in the last window, and there's 15 new projects going in. With one of those projects, very interesting, it's a community project at the Toronto Zoo. So they'll be figuring out how much manure comes from, I was going to say elephant, but they ship the elephants off to Parkers in California. So I guess I can't say that anymore. So it'd be manure from a line or something. How much energy is it? It's very interesting what's going on there. There's continued ability. So there's a new opening to sell power to the grid, and as of August 2013, we have a series of new prices, and we've had quite a substantial increase on prices for 100 kilowatts or less. You get 26.5 cents per kilowatt hour. It used to be 19.5. So this is going to really increase interest in the small systems. We think that with the ability to bring in more on-farm materials allows a 100-cow operation to build a 100-kilowatt facility. So really, the next thing the farmer will need to know is if there's a grid connection able to take that away. We have a calculator at one of the projects, the University of Guelph, the School of Ag Economics, person who does masters on this. So basically, you you can put in your calculation, it'll tell you what your net present value is, whether you're going to make money or not on it. We're finding that as the smaller systems go, you pretty much have to keep a 100 kilowatt system at or below $1 million to make it viable. So that's $10,000 per kilowatt hour is the maximum we can pay, and that is difficult to achieve. We thought the prices at the beginning of this were quite a bit lower, but by the time you get connected to the grid, need all the approval, build all the systems, all the controls, and you will get your costs will get up there between $6,000 to almost $12,000 per kilowatt of production. So the challenge we see in many of these farms is energy inputs, obtaining enough energy. So in Ontario, we have typically smaller livestock farms. I'm talking mostly dairy and poultry. Right now, there's not a lot of interest in hogs, but that might change in the near future. You need 5 cows per kilowatt. So even for 100 kilowatt systems, which seem to be fairly small, you need to have additional energy inputs. And we don't have very many 500 cow systems in the province. So the list of energy inputs are energy crops, co-substrates, and what I mean by co-substrates, I mean off-farm source materials or manure from other farms. One of the challenges with manure is that the animals have already taken a lot of the energy from it, so it's very low energy density. So we have been working with pipelines to hook farms together. Here's a case of 2 pipelines that bring it to a central facility where the digester would be located. But very quickly your costs become high and quite prohibitive. You've got to remember, you've got to move the materials in and you've got to move the digestate back. So it's possible that we're going to see some, but production, but we're not going to see a huge expansion of that. Just as far as application goes, again, I talked about it was the ability to apply this equipment precisely. This is Volvo Zang. This is a company from Holland. And again, it can apply to a coefficient of 95% accuracy. So it's the ability to, when you apply this material, you can truly replace commercial fertilizer, even throughout the whole process. The next thing is talk about is the ability to accept certain co-substrates. By co-substrates, I mean off-farm source material. So we have an act under the Nutrient Management Act, and we call these regulated mixed AD facilities. So it's a material that can take mixed materials to a farm. Right now, the rules are allowing you to take up to 25% off-farm materials. There's a series of rules. I've talked about them briefly. It has lists. It tells you how much you have to pre-treat, what temperature, regulated metal limits. So we use the same as the most restrictive level for compost, what metals you can bring into the farms. That's all part of it. There has been a change that has just been approved that increases the amount of material you can take to 50%. However, and as part of that, there's been a number of other changes. That's also been included in the regulation. We have increased the setback distances for facilities located at non-livestock operations. We have a delivery time period. You can only take off-farm materials from 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. We have signage requirements. Now farmers have to sign the farms, the digester that they're taking off-farm materials, and they have to have emergency numbers. We need to, there's new rules to be designed to minimize leakage and noise. We've had some issues with systems not related to livestock farms. We have had some issues with the noise from the engine running 24/7. We're requiring a mandatory secondary combustion system for larger facilities. We're requiring sampling ports with dual valves. And last one is we require monitoring devices for any pressure relief system. So that if a pressure, if you get too high a biogas, there's a monitor that goes up, tells a farmer that that's happening, keeping a record of it. The acquiring co-substrates. So this is the ability to bring co-substrates from urban food processing plants and moving it to digester. One of the challenges is that Many of the co-substrates will be in the second list, which means that you need to heat treat at 70 Celsius for an hour. That, once you get to a smaller system, just that system itself likely costs $200,000 to $300,000 by the time you put all the controls in, and it's economically unviable for smaller systems. So one of the changes we made, that has been made in the regulations, is that this pretreatment can take place off-site. So we see organic waste, organic material companies gathering off-farm source materials, taking them to a central plant, heat treating the materials at 70 Celsius, guaranteeing that they've been treated like that, then moving it out to the farms a truckload at a time. A typical small farm will be taking between 1 to 2 tractor trailer loads or 30 cubic meters of off-farm material per week. So working with the industry, you see options here, working with the industry, and again this industry could pre-sort the organic materials and they could pick its best home. They could move the highly volatile materials such as grease trap waste to farms or other digesters. They could remove the materials that slowly break down to compost sites. They can move the materials that contain sand, some sand, to compost sites, but we don't want that in our digesters. So I think that's the end of my talk here. I guess now we will open this up for questions, if there's any questions, and I think I have a few minutes left. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much, Don, for that. There is a question. I think it starts off with an easy one from Frank Peters here, and Frank is from the AIM Environmental Group in Ontario, and he's asking where the sites that you showed in your pictures, where they are located.
The sites I showed, the one is located north of Woodstock, kind of close. I'm speaking from Woodstock here, which is in near London, Ontario. So one is located north of Woodstock. Another one is located north of Kitchener-Waterloo. The last one's located north of Guelph. There's really two groupings of digesters. That's maybe old information. We have a group that's in Eastern Ontario. There's about 10 to 12 digesters in Eastern Ontario, kind of in the Ottawa area. And then we have a group that's in the Kitchener-Waterloo area that has about 12 digesters. I guess a few less than that, about 10 digesters. Then we got some in Peterborough, Essex, Niagara area. So they're distributed across the province, but they're all located near land where you can apply nutrients.
Okay. I don't see any questions right now, but I'm sure if we give people a couple more minutes to ask anything about the process or about regulations in Ontario.
The challenge is again, and I think Manitoba will struggle with this maybe more than even Ontario, is finding off-farm materials. These systems can use a lot of materials. We typically system is using about 4,000 cubic meters of materials per year. So that's quite a task for the farmer to achieve these. And we probably, especially with the smaller systems, we don't see that as maybe being the best goal for the farmer. The goal for the farmer should be to operate the plant, keep his other livestock or cooperation going, and then have other groups that are really in the business of gathering these materials, pre-sorting them, and then moving them to the farm. The nice thing about this is that it's a continuous movement. So So typically, off-farm materials are produced on a daily basis. None of that isn't true in all cases. We do have some where we get peaks. But the nice thing about here is that the farmers will take care of the storage. So they have to have 240 days of digestate storage. So they'll take care of the storage and the application onto the land. What they need is a continuous input of high quality, uniform materials coming out of it. Now, as a digester, the longer the digester runs, the more robust, this is what we find out, more robust it gets biologically, and it's able to stand changes in input materials coming at it better than if you than at the beginning. Okay.
Okay. Excellent. This got a few more questions. One from Esther. She asks, she's from Metro Vancouver, and she's asking, does your Nutrient Management Act allow you to take pre-treated source-separated organics from municipal sources?
Okay, I missed that. We cannot take source-separated organics. That's something that is excluded from these facilities. So we're taking everything pre-consumer. So it's from food processors, everything from the food processing, nothing beyond that. That is, again, I think there's too much risk and too many plastics and contaminants coming. Those materials, I think, will move to composting or move to a centralized digestion facility, or to a farm facility that gets another approval. So there's two other approvals. This is the one, a very prescriptive approval through the Nutrient Management Act. You can also get approval through the Environmental Protection Act, an ECA if you're producing biomethane, or you could get a REA approval, Renewable Energy Approval, if you're producing electricity and if you're not in the very prescriptive process defined by the regulated mixed AD facility, the Nutrient Act. So we got really three different approval of processes available for farmers or for larger digesters taking off-farm source materials. I was just focusing on the one under the Nutrient Management Act.
Okay. A question from Danielle Buclis from the Composting Council asks, can you provide some details about the study being undertaken regarding testing of the digestate post-processing? Yes.
So there has been questions on how do we determine that the digestate is fully treated or treated enough. I guess that would be the point. So there is a study that's its parameters or the terms of content are still being developed on that, and it's to do a literature search and to look at various ways to prove that a digester is fulfilling the function of properly treating the materials coming in. And so that study is still being developed and should be ready to proceed shortly.
Okay. Question from Ashley Keem from Manitoba Conservation and Water Stewardship asks, how much methane is in the biogas?
Okay, so the methane, this is after you've operated for a while. It takes a while for it to get to steady state. So typically you run between 40 to 60% methane in biogas. Most of our plants will be in the 55% range. The remaining gas is carbon dioxide and other some hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide can do damage to the engine, so we scrub out the hydrogen sulfide normally by injecting a little bit of air, oxygen, into the the biogas holding system. And by adding 5% oxygen that will, after a month or two, will create a biological process that will cause the hydrogen sulfide to lower from commonly 2,000 parts per million to 100 parts per million or less. And the engine requirements are typically 100 to 200 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide. So that's the way we're doing. Also, you can use ferric chloride to scrub out the hydrogen sulfide. So there's two different ways, but that's something that's a necessity to be able to produce electricity. Interesting enough, we're finding that some of the materials used in DAP systems and food processing plants, so some of the chemicals that are added to cause precipitation of the DAP are also very effective in removing hydrogen sulfide. So we have some plants that are adding nothing to the digester and have very low hydrogen sulfide levels because they're taking DAP materials as their inputs. And just a little more information. A cubic meter of biogas produces 6 kilowatts of energy in it, and our engines are typically running between 20 to 40% of electrical efficiency. So if you take 20% of 6 kilowatts, you get 1.2 kilowatts of electricity per cubic meter of biogas. But people are aiming, because in Ontario, most of the income stream, most or all of the income stream is from selling electricity. People are trying to produce as much biogas as possible and also have the most efficient engine. There's very little money in heat, so they're looking for an engine that can be as close as possible to 40% electrical efficiency.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. One more question here from Marianne Maltese from Recyc, Quebec. Can the installations be financed through a grant program?
What kind of program?
Through a grant program.
Okay, so a little bit of history on that is we did have a grant program to kickstart the industry about 5 years ago. So 20 plants were built on that grant program. We paid $400,000 per project on that. So right now there is no grant program. What is needed is the ability, in our case, is the ability to sell power to the grid with a 20-year contract. So a FIT contract is a 20-year contract, and you're getting substantially more on that contract than you would get if you would sell wholesale power on the grid. You could not build these selling wholesale power on the grid.
There's a question from Haley Frederick from CFIA. She's got her hand up here. I'll try to unmute her. Haley? Hi.
Hi. This is my first time using webinar, so hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. Don, I know we've talked about this before, and just Danielle kind of touched on it there as well. You were talking about putting the compost-like product back through the digester several times, and you said that you can only do so for so long before you end up with different issues with accumulation of nitrogen and stuff like that if you're using pet food. How are you able to actually monitor accumulation of anything if you're not testing the final product coming out?
Well, I'm going to hold my phone down so I don't get down. In that case, it'll affect the farmer directly because he will get a reduction in yield. And he will very quickly changing his process because he's making the majority of his money from generating.
Hey, Don?
Yes.
Now we're getting feedback on your line. Can you
Julie,
repeat
maybe
your
you can.
answer?
Sorry, Jolene, maybe you can mute me again. Maybe that'll help.
Okay.
Okay, we'll try that again. The major issue, the nitrogen will affect the yield. And the yield is where the farmer makes the money, and the farmer will identify that he's not, the system's not running at, say, 250 kilowatts, and they will find the nitrogen and immediately stop feeding it because the money's made on the production of the facility. So you need to keep these systems default to pay for the system. You have to have a very sound biological process happening that's continuously producing biogas. And we're getting, and I have to verify the number, we're getting about 70 to 80% of the theoretical production out of these systems. So farmers are doing everything possible to produce biogas, as much biogas as possible. And I'm talking about the average system here.
Unmuted.
Other questions?
We'll give people a couple more minutes, or a couple more seconds here to get any last-minute questions in.
And if anybody wants to email me, they can. It's don.hilborn@ontario.ca. I do have the link to this economic spreadsheet. And it's a very complex spreadsheet, but it does have an introductory screen so we do a quick assessment, but if you want to get into details, there's about 5 sheets of information, so you do a very specific study. The other thing that I didn't talk about much is peak production and ability for these systems to store and to then produce during peak hours. One of the challenges there is that our the price tranches are based on production of the generator. So if you only run for 1/3 of the time, then you have to have 3 times the size generator, which puts you into lower price tranche, which normally makes the thing uneconomical. So right now, this is set up, and most people will try to run to pay these plants to get a return on these. They've got to run the plants 80% of the time or more.
Okay, well, we'll cut it off there. It is 1 o'clock. Oh, of course, one person got a question here. Andrew Drury. You mentioned that there is a challenge on finding inputs for the digesters. You touched on a central transfer station of sorts. Can you expand? Is this something to be headed up by a government agency or by waste collectors/haulers?
Yeah, I can't really. I think there's an opportunity here for waste haulers to develop this. I think that I don't see government in the group that at least physically does this. I think our rules now can facilitate that through the Nutrient Management Act. We cannot take source separated organics at these plants, so currently you can't do that right now. So again, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. Because of the pricing in the FIT program, we think there's going to be a lot more smaller systems going in. And the smaller systems, they're not going to have the time or the capability to be organizing materials coming in. So I think there's a real need for, that's in my personal opinion, there's a real need for a process to enable this materials to move. The other thing is we could actually work with the compost group, and we could be taking some compost or compost that is not fully cured out to plants, and then get more energy out of it. That's possible, and then the plants then can do the treatment and the storage and the spreading of it onto the plant. Right now, compost is not in the list, so if it's from a farm source, you can't do that under the Nutrient Management Act, but you can do it under RIA or an ECA approval.
Okay, and a follow-up question for that from Aline Smith from Maple Dell Enterprises in Ontario. She asks, how much does the tip fee for off-farm organics contribute to the financial viability?
Well, I can't talk about everybody's case. In the spreadsheet, we have a -5. So we're saying that the costs in obtaining these materials is a net cost. There's a cost of $5. I think we're aiming there at the fact that we want fairly, especially when you get lower levels of, if you restrict it to lower levels, then you want to have a very high quality material coming into you, so that people are after fairly high quality. As I don't know how this is going to evolve over time, so but I think the key point is that the farmers, at least the ones that we're talking to, the main source of income is from the production of the green energy on the farm. So their main goal for the farmer is to be operating this system as close as possible to the capacity of the facility and as close as possible to 8,000 hours a year. So that's a 90% production capacity. That would be the goal. We're not getting there. We're typically running 70 to 80% capacity. The other thing that might evolve with the price of corn dropping now is that corn silage is will be getting lower cost, and so we could be getting some byproducts from corn and other crop production such as straw being used in the digesters more.
Okay, well, I'm going to cut it off there, and if anyone has questions, they can feel free to contact Dawn or through the Compost Council or through Green Manitoba. I'm going to remind you that our next webinar is Wednesday, December 4th. Dr. Britt Fosse from Filtrex International. He will be speaking about the use of high potential compost markets based on Filtrex applications. So I hope you will be able to attend that, and be reminded that all webinars will start at noon Central Time, and I hope you can attend. And thank you on behalf of Green Manitoba. Thank you very much, Dawn, for doing this presentation. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it and got some valuable information from it. And from all you folks for attending, thank you very much as well.